The wine was cold, not room temperature like it should have been, but ice cold, as it soaked through my white uniform shirt and clung to my skin. For a moment, time stood still, their laughter suspended in the air like shattered glass before it hits the floor. "Oops," said the blonde one, her voice dripping with the same artificial sweetness as the perfume clouding the air around their table. So clumsy of me. I stood frozen, the empty tray clutched in my trembling hands, feeling the red liquid seep through the fabric and trace rivulets down my stomach. Merlot. Table 7 had ordered a $300 bottle of Merlot, and now most of it was decorating my chest, transforming my crisp white shirt into a spreading crimson disaster. "I'll get you another bottle right away," I managed, my voice barely audible over the ambient jazz and clinking silverware that filled Bellissimo, the upscale Italian restaurant where I'd been working double shifts for the past 3 months. The brunette, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, didn't even look at me when she spoke. "And put it on your tab, right? Since you're the one who spilled it." More laughter. The third woman, whose diamond bracelet caught the light with every dismissive wave of her hand, finally glanced up at me. "You know, some people just aren't cut out for carrying trays. Maybe you should try another line of work." The restaurant around us continued its Friday night symphony of conversations and piano music, but at our little island of cruelty, I was drowning. 6 months pregnant, feet swollen inside practical black shoes, working 2 jobs since my boyfriend Leo disappeared with our savings, leaving me with nothing but a half-furnished apartment and an ultrasound picture taped to the refrigerator. "I'm sorry," I said automatically, the words bitter on my tongue. "I'll speak to my manager." As I turned away, the blonde grabbed my wrist, her manicured nails digging into my skin. "Wait, your shirt is see-through now." Her smile widened. "Everyone can see your cheap bra. Maybe you'll get better tips tonight." I pulled away, feeling my cheeks burn with humiliation. My eyes stung with unshed tears as I hurried toward the kitchen, avoiding the curious stares from the other diners. I pushed through the swinging doors, the blast of heat and noise from the kitchen, a momentary shield from what had just happened. "Sophia, what the hell?" Marco, the floor manager, stepped in front of me, his eyes widening at the state of my uniform. "Table 7, I said quietly, setting down the tray. "They spilled their wine on me. On purpose." Marco's face darkened. He was a decent man, strict but fair. "Those women? The ones who've been sending back everything?" I nodded, reaching for a dishcloth to dab at my shirt. The stain had already set, spreading across my protruding belly. Another uniform I couldn't afford to replace. "They're saying I should pay for the new bottle," I added, hating how small my voice sounded. "Like hell you will," Marco growled. "But they're connected. Friends of the Castellani family. We can't just—" "It's fine," I cut in, suddenly exhausted. "I just need a few minutes to clean up, and maybe a black apron to cover this." Marco hesitated, then nodded. "Take 10. Use my office if you want privacy. I'll handle their table." I slipped into the small office at the back of the kitchen, closing the door behind me. Only then did I allow the tears to fall. Silent drops tracking down my flushed cheeks. I caught my reflection in the small mirror on the wall. Pale face, dark circles under my eyes, damp red stain blooming across my chest and rounded belly. "It's okay, little one," I whispered, resting a hand on my stomach where my baby girl was kicking, as if sensing my distress. "Mama's okay. Just a bad night." I'd had many bad nights since Leo cleaned out our bank account and disappeared. We weren't even married, something my traditional Italian mother had lamented until her final breath last year. Now, at 27, I was alone, pregnant, and working 60-hour weeks between this restaurant and the morning shift at a downtown cafe. After dabbing at my shirt with a wet paper towel and securing a black apron around my waist, I checked my appearance once more. The stain was still visible, but at least the apron covered most of it. I pulled my dark hair back into a fresh ponytail, applied a quick touch of concealer under my eyes, and straightened my shoulders. Just 5 more hours until closing. I could do this. When I emerged, Marco was waiting with a replacement bottle of Merlot. "I told them it's on the house," he said quietly, "and I'm assigning Paolo to take over their table." I shook my head. "No, I need the tips." I can handle it. Marco looked like he wanted to argue, but instead handed me the wine. Your funeral. But if they pull anything else, I'm stepping in. Balancing the tray with practiced care, I made my way back into the dining room. The restaurant had filled up in the past 20 minutes. Every table now occupied with Milan's Friday night dinner crowd. Bellissimo wasn't the most exclusive restaurant in the city, but it was upscale enough to attract wealth, and occasionally, some minor celebrities. As I approached table 7, I noticed something had changed. The women were sitting straighter, their laughter muted, their eyes darting nervously to the entrance of the restaurant. I followed their gaze and nearly stumbled. He stood in the doorway like he owned not just the restaurant, but the very ground beneath it. Tall and broad-shouldered in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, he had the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. Dark hair swept back from a face that was all sharp angles and shadows. But it was his eyes that held me, cold and calculating as they surveyed the room, then unexpectedly warm when they landed on me. I'd seen him before, of course, Antonio Richi. He didn't come to Bellissimo often, but when he did, the entire staff moved with extra precision. He owned several businesses across Milan, legitimate ones, according to public record, but whispers followed him like shadows. Stories about connections to the old Sicilian families, about what happened to people who crossed him. Everyone knew to address him as Mr. Richi, and to ensure his usual corner table was always available, even on the busiest nights. Tonight, that table was occupied by an elderly couple, celebrating what appeared to be an anniversary. I watched as the maitre d' rushed forward, apologizing profusely. With a dismissive gesture, Richi silenced him, then pointed to an empty table near the kitchen, one usually reserved for staff meals during slow periods. The maitre d' looked horrified, but Richi was already moving toward it, followed by 2 men in dark suits who positioned themselves at strategic points nearby, their eyes constantly scanning the room. I realized I'd been standing frozen, still holding the wine for table 7. With effort, I tore my gaze away from Richi and continued my approach to the now subdued women. "Your Merlot," I said, carefully placing the bottle on the table and beginning to open it with practiced movements. The blonde who had grabbed my wrist earlier cleared her throat. "Look, we were just having some fun before. No hard feelings, right?" I didn't respond, focusing on pouring the wine into their glasses with steady hands. "Hey," said the brunette, her tone sharper. "She's apologizing to you. The least you could do is acknowledge it." I met her eyes then, allowing a moment of honesty to slip through my professional mask. "Would you have apologized if he hadn't walked in?" The 3 exchanged glances, their earlier bravado evaporating. They knew exactly who he was. "We didn't mean anything by it," the third woman said, suddenly looking much younger and more uncertain. "It was just a joke." "Jokes are supposed to be funny," I replied quietly, finishing the last pour. "Will there be anything else?" The blonde shook her head, not meeting my eyes. I turned to leave, but as I did, I felt it, the weight of someone's gaze. Not the women at table 7, but from across the room. Antonio Richi was watching me, his dark eyes intense under the restaurant's soft lighting. There was something in that look, curiosity perhaps, or something deeper that made my skin flush with unexpected heat. For a moment that stretched into eternity, our eyes held, and the bustling restaurant seemed to fade away into background noise. Then Marco appeared at his table, breaking the spell, and I hurried back toward the kitchen, my heart racing for reasons I couldn't explain. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of orders and clearing plates. I avoided table 7 as much as possible, sending the busboy to refill their water and check if they needed anything else. They didn't leave much of a tip, but I hadn't expected them to. What I hadn't expected was for Antonio Richi to stay until closing, nursing a single glass of whiskey as the restaurant gradually emptied. His bodyguards remained vigilant, occasionally speaking into their earpieces or scanning new arrivals with practiced efficiency. Several times throughout the evening, I felt his eyes on me. Each time a shiver would race down my spine, and I would find some task to occupy me in another section of the restaurant. It was nearly midnight when Marco approached me as I was tallying my receipts for the night. "Mr. Richi would like to speak with you," he said, his expression unreadable. I froze, the calculator slipping from my fingers. "With me? Why?" Marco shrugged. He didn't say. But when Antonio Richi asks for something, you don't say no. I finished for him. Heart hammering against my ribs, I smoothed down my stained uniform and followed Marco across the now empty restaurant. The bodyguards straightened as we approached, their faces impassive. Antonio Richi looked up from his phone as we stopped at his table. This close, I could see the fine lines around his eyes and the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. He wasn't young, perhaps early 40s, but there was a vitality about him that made age seem irrelevant. "Sir," Marco began, "this is Sofia Russo, as you requested." Richi's eyes, a brown so dark they appeared almost black, moved from Marco to me, his gaze lingering on the wine stain across my chest before rising to meet mine. Something flickered in their depths. Anger, perhaps, though not directed at me. "Thank you, Marco," he said, his voice a low rumble with the barest hint of a Sicilian accent. "That will be all." Marco hesitated only briefly before nodding and retreating, leaving me standing alone before Antonio Ricci's table, acutely aware of my disheveled appearance and the exhaustion pulling at my features. "Sit," Richi said, not a request, but a command. I lowered myself into the chair opposite him, resting my hands protectively over my belly. "How far along are you?" he asked, nodding toward my stomach. 6 months, I answered, surprised by the question. He studied me for a moment, then gestured to one of his men who immediately produced a sleek leather portfolio and placed it before him. Richi opened it, revealing what appeared to be a contract of some kind. "Those women," he said, his tone conversational, yet undercut with steel. "The ones who spilled wine on you, do you know who they are?" I shook my head, anxiety coiling in my chest. "Customers. That's all." A smile touched his lips, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Not just customers. The blonde is Valentina Castellani, daughter of Giovanni Castellani. The others are her cousins." The name meant nothing to me, and my blank expression must have conveyed as much. "The Castellanis control much of the shipping in and out of Genoa," he explained, his fingers drumming once on the table before going still. "They fancy themselves important, untouchable." I swallowed hard, suddenly understanding the weight of the situation. "Mr. Richi, it was just an accident. I don't want any trouble." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Was it? An accident?" Under his penetrating gaze, the lie withered on my tongue. "No," I admitted, "but it doesn't matter." "It matters to me," he said, the words falling between us like stones into still water. Before I could respond, he turned the contract toward me. "You're working 2 jobs. You're pregnant and alone. The father?" The abrupt change of subject caught me off guard. "He's not in the picture." Richi nodded, as if confirming something he already knew. "I have a proposition for you, Sofia Russo. A job. Better hours. Substantially better pay. You would start immediately." I stared at him, trying to process his words. "A job? Doing what?" "Personal chef. In my home." His gaze was steady, assessing. "You have culinary training, yes?" Before you started waiting tables. The fact that he knew this, a detail I hadn't mentioned to anyone at Bellissimo, sent a chill through me. "How did you—" "I make it my business to know things," he interrupted smoothly. 6,000 euros a month. Health insurance, a car, an apartment in my building until you find suitable accommodation. My mouth went dry. 6,000 euros was more than triple what I made between both my jobs. It would change everything. My baby's future, my desperate financial situation. "Why me?" I managed to ask, suspicion finally cutting through my shock. Men like Antonio Richi didn't offer salvation without expecting something in return. For the first time, something like genuine amusement crossed his features. "Because, Sofia Russo, I've eaten your cooking before. Last month, when the head chef was ill, you prepared my meal. A risotto that reminded me of my grandmother's." I remembered that night. The chef had food poisoning, and I'd stepped in, drawing on my training from culinary school. Education I'd never completed after my mother's medical bills consumed my tuition money. "That was you?" I whispered. He nodded. "I've been looking for a new chef. And you?" His eyes traveled once more to the wine stain on my shirt. "You need a new beginning." The contract sat between us, a lifeline I was afraid to grasp. It seemed too perfect, too convenient. Men like Antonio Richi didn't appear at your lowest moment with exactly what you needed unless there was a catch. A price to be paid eventually, but as my baby shifted inside me, I thought about the mountain of bills waiting at home, the second notice on my rent, the empty refrigerator. What choice did I really have? May I think about it? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. Impatience, perhaps, or displeasure at not getting an immediate yes. Until tomorrow, he conceded, closing the portfolio with a decisive snap. I'll send a car for your answer, 10 a.m. With that, he stood, towering over me. I rose awkwardly, one hand bracing against the table for support. To my surprise, he reached out, his hand closing gently around my elbow to steady me. His touch sent an electric current racing up my arm, and I jerked away instinctively. A smile played at the corners of his mouth. Until tomorrow, Sophia Russo. As he turned to leave, his bodyguards immediately flanking him, I found my voice again. Mr. Richi? He paused, looking back at me over his shoulder. What happens to them? The women who... the Castellani daughter and her cousins? For a moment, his expression darkened to something truly frightening, then smoothed into perfect, practiced neutrality. Nothing you need to concern yourself with. And with that, he was gone, leaving me alone in the empty restaurant with a stained uniform, aching feet, and a contract that promised salvation or damnation. I wasn't sure which. What I didn't know then, as I gathered my things and stepped into the cool Milan night, was that my life had already changed irrevocably, that by morning, the story of what happened to the women who spilled wine on Antonio Ricci's future wife would be whispered throughout the city. But that part of the story hadn't happened yet. Sleep evaded me that night. I tossed in my small bed, one hand resting on my rounded belly as my daughter kicked restlessly, matching my own anxiety. The digital clock on my nightstand cast a red glow across the sparse bedroom. 3:17 a.m. In less than 7 hours, a car would arrive for my answer to Antonio Ricci's proposition. A proposition that could change everything. I pushed myself up and padded to the kitchen, my swollen feet protesting each step. The apartment was barely large enough for one person, let alone a mother and child. The nursery corner I'd started setting up occupied what should have been the dining area, a second-hand crib, and a small dresser found at a flea market, painted white to hide the chips and scratches. Under the harsh fluorescent light, I examined Antonio Ricci's business card. Heavy cardstock, minimalist design, just his name and a phone number embossed in silver. I'd found it in my purse when I got home, though I had no memory of him placing it there. 6,000 euros a month. The figure danced through my mind, tantalizing and terrifying. It would mean security for my baby. It would mean no more double shifts on swollen feet, no more dismissive customers treating me like I was invisible. But working for Antonio Ricci, living in his building, would mean stepping into a world I knew nothing about. A world where wine-stained shirts led to midnight job offers and veiled threats. By dawn, exhaustion had won out over anxiety. I must have dozed off at the kitchen table because I woke with a start to pounding on my door. My heart leaped into my throat as I checked the time, 8:30 a.m. The car wasn't supposed to come until 10. The knocking came again, more insistent. Sophia, open up, it's Marco. Relief flooded through me as I recognized my manager's voice. I unlocked the door to find Marco standing in the hallway, his usually neat appearance disheveled, as if he'd dressed in a hurry. Thank God, he said, pushing past me into the apartment. You haven't answered your phone. I've been trying to reach you all morning. I must have slept through it, I said, confused by his urgency. What's wrong? Did something happen at the restaurant? Marco ran a hand through his hair. You could say that. The Castellani women, the ones from last night, they've disappeared. A cold weight settled in my stomach. What do you mean, disappeared? They never made it home. Their driver was found unconscious in their car outside the restaurant. The women were gone. He lowered his voice, though we were alone in my apartment. And there's a rumor going around that before they vanished, they were seen speaking with Antonio Ricci's men. The room seemed to tilt beneath my feet. I sank into a chair, one hand automatically cradling my belly. That's not possible. I saw Mr. Richi leave. His men were with him. Not all of them, Marco said grimly. Look, Sophia, I need to know exactly what he said to you last night. I hesitated, suddenly wary. Marco had always been kind to me, but survival in Milan had taught me caution. He offered me a job as his personal chef. Marco's eyes widened. And you said? I asked for time to think. He's sending a car at 10. He checked his watch, then paced the small kitchen. You can't take it. Whatever he's offering, it's not worth it. Men like Richi, they don't just hire pregnant waitresses because they liked your risotto. The note of suspicion in his voice stung. What exactly are you implying? I'm not implying anything. I'm telling you that Antonio Richi is dangerous. The restaurants, the real estate, it's all a front. Everyone knows he runs half the criminal operations in northern Italy. Those are rumors, I countered, though my voice lacked conviction. Marco stopped pacing to look at me directly. Do you really believe that? After what happened to those women? I didn't answer. Couldn't. Because deep down, I'd sensed the danger surrounding Antonio Richi from the moment he walked into Bellissimo. It radiated from him like heat from a flame, that lethal combination of power and restraint. I have a cousin in Turin, Marco continued. He owns a small cafe. He could use help. It's not much, but it would get you away from here. Away from Richi. For a moment I considered it. A fresh start in a new city, far from Antonio Ricci's penetrating gaze and the mysterious fate of the Castellani women. But then reality reasserted itself. I can't just leave, Marco. I have nothing saved. My rent is due next week. I need money. He finished for me. I know, I could help. Just until you get on your feet. I shook my head. Marco was a good man, but he had a family of his own, expenses of his own. I couldn't become his charity case. Thank you, but no. He looked like he wanted to argue further, but a sleek black car pulling up outside my building caught his attention. That's one of his, he said, moving to the window. Sophia, please. Think about what you're doing. But I already had. All night. Weighing my options. Calculating risks against necessities. What choice did I really have? Flee to Turin with nothing, dependent on Marco's cousin's goodwill? Or accept Ricci's offer and secure my child's future? I have to talk to him, I said, my decision crystallizing with each passing second. At least hear the details. Marco's expression hardened. Then I can't help you. The words hurt more than they should have. In the months I'd worked at Bellissimo, Marco had been the closest thing I had to a friend. Now he was backing away from me like I'd already made a deal with the devil. Perhaps I had. I understand, I said quietly. He hesitated at the door. If you change your mind, the offer stands. Turin, a new start. After he left, I dressed quickly in the nicest outfit that still fit my pregnant body, a simple navy dress and a cardigan that had belonged to my mother. I pulled my dark hair into a neat bun, applied minimal makeup to hide the shadows under my eyes, and gathered what few important documents I had into my purse, just in case. The black car was still waiting when I emerged from my building. A driver in a suit opened the rear door without a word. Inside, to my surprise, was Antonio Richi himself. He wore another impeccable suit, this one a deep blue that highlighted the olive undertones of his skin. His attention was focused on a document in his hands, but he looked up as I slid into the seat beside him, the leather cool against my bare legs. Ms. Russo, he acknowledged, folding the document and tucking it into an inside pocket of his suit jacket. I didn't expect you so early. Your car arrived early, I pointed out. A slight smile played at his lips. So it did. He nodded to the driver, and the car pulled smoothly away from the curb. Have you had breakfast? The question was so mundane, so normal, that it threw me momentarily. No. Without another word, he pressed a button on the console between us. Alfredo, take us to Cafe Cova. I shifted uncomfortably in the plush seat, acutely aware of Antonio Ricci's presence beside me, the subtle scent of his cologne, the controlled power in his posture, the way his hands rested casually on his thighs. This close, I could see a thin scar that traced along his jawline, barely visible unless you were looking for it. The women from last night, I said abruptly. The Castellanis. What happened to them? If my directness surprised him, he didn't show it. His dark eyes assessed me for a long moment before he answered. They're alive, if that's your concern. but they disappeared. Did they? His tone was almost conversational. Perhaps they decided to extend their evening. Milan has many entertainments. Marco, my manager, said their driver was found unconscious. Richi's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Your manager seems unusually well informed about the movements of the Castellani family. A warning flashed in my mind. I'd said too much, potentially put Marco in danger. He hears things, that's all. The restaurant industry is full of gossip. Richi seemed to accept this, his features relaxing into that careful neutrality I was beginning to recognize as his public mask. And what else does the restaurant industry gossip about, Ms. Russo? You, I admitted. And what do they say? I hesitated, weighing honesty against safety, but something told me Antonio Richi would recognize a lie instantly, and respect it even less than an uncomfortable truth. They say your restaurants and real estate are just fronts for other businesses. He didn't seem offended by my bluntness. If anything, a flicker of approval crossed his features. And what do you believe? I believe, I said slowly, that a man who can make 3 women disappear in the middle of a crowded restaurant district is not simply a restaurateur. The car pulled up in front of Cafe Cova, one of Milan's oldest and most prestigious cafes. Richi made no move to exit, his eyes still fixed on me with unsettling intensity. You're either very brave or very foolish, Sofia Russo, he said finally, my name rolling off his tongue with a hint of his Sicilian accent. Desperate, I corrected him. Not brave or foolish, just desperate. Something shifted in his gaze, a softening perhaps, or merely a recalculation. Then we understand each other. The driver opened the door, and Richi stepped out, extending a hand to help me. After a moment's hesitation, I took it, trying to ignore the spark of awareness that shot through me at his touch. Cafe Cova was just opening for the day, but the staff seemed to recognize Richi immediately. We were ushered to a private table in a corner alcove, sheltered from the curious gazes of the few early patrons. Within minutes, a spread appeared before us. Delicate pastries, fresh fruit, artisanal cheeses, and 2 cups of steaming espresso. Eat, Richi instructed, nodding toward the feast. The baby needs nourishment. My stomach growled traitorously, and I relented, selecting a cornetto filled with apricot preserves. The first bite was heavenly after my night of anxious fasting. Now, Richi said, leaning back in his chair with casual elegance, let's discuss your employment. As I ate, he outlined the position in precise, businesslike terms. I would oversee his personal kitchen, preparing meals for him, and occasionally for small groups of associates. I would have complete creative control over the menu, with an unlimited budget for ingredients. My living quarters would be a 2-bedroom apartment in the secure building where he maintained his primary residence, separate from his penthouse, but conveniently located on the floor below. The hours are flexible, he continued, watching as I sipped my espresso, but I expect availability when needed, sometimes with little notice. And my baby? I asked, the question that had been foremost in my mind. A nanny will be provided when you're working, the finest medical care throughout your pregnancy and after. Everything the child needs. It all sounded too perfect, too generous. There had to be a catch. And what exactly do you expect from me, Mr. Richi? He raised an eyebrow. I've just told you. Your culinary expertise, your discretion. Nothing else? I pressed, needing absolute clarity. A dangerous smile curved his lips. Are you asking if I expect sexual favors in exchange for my generosity, Ms. Russo? Heat flooded my cheeks. I need to know what I'm agreeing to. A wise precaution, he conceded, but unnecessary in this case. I don't force women into my bed. I find willing partners are far more satisfying. The way his eyes darkened as he spoke sent an unexpected thrill through me, one I immediately tried to suppress. This man was dangerous, possibly responsible for the disappearance of 3 women just hours ago. And yet, I couldn't deny the pull I felt toward him, like a moth to a flame that promised both warmth and destruction. Do we have an agreement? He asked, extending a hand across the table. I looked at that hand, strong, with manicured nails and a single platinum ring on his right index finger. A hand that signed contracts and perhaps ordered punishments. A hand offering salvation. I placed my palm against his. We do. His fingers closed around mine, warm and firm. Welcome to my household, Sophia. The contract was signed there, in the quiet corner of Café Cova. As Milan came to life around us, I wrote my name on the line he indicated, sealing my fate with a stroke of an expensive pen. What I didn't fully understand then was that I'd just agreed to so much more than a job. I'd stepped into Antonio Ricci's world, a world of shadows and secrets, of power and protection, of danger and desire, a world from which there would be no easy escape. Life with Antonio Ricci began that same day. After breakfast, he instructed his driver to take me back to my apartment to collect my belongings. 2 men in suits accompanied me, efficiently packing my meager possessions into sleek black suitcases that probably cost more than everything I owned. I stood in the center of the tiny living room, watching as they dismantled the nursery corner. One of them carefully wrapped the second-hand crib in protective plastic, treating it with unexpected reverence. "Mr. Ricci said everything comes," he explained, noticing my surprise. "Especially the baby things." By noon, my old life had been neatly boxed and loaded into the trunk of a second car. I took one last look around the empty apartment, my hand resting protectively on my belly. 6 months ago, Leo and I had moved in with such hope, painting the walls and buying furniture for what was supposed to be our first real home. Now, I was leaving alone, carrying our child and nothing else of the future we had planned. The drive to Antonio's building took us through the heart of Milan, past the magnificent Duomo and into Brera, one of the city's most exclusive districts. We stopped before a restored Palazzo, 7 stories of elegant architecture with a discreet security presence at the entrance. "This is where Mr. Ricci lives?" I asked the driver. "He owns the building," came the reply. "The penthouse is his personal residence. Your apartment is on the 6th floor. The lobby was a study in understated luxury. Marble floors, tasteful art, and a security desk where 2 men in suits nodded respectfully as we entered. One of them accompanied us in the elevator, using a key card to access the 6th floor. The apartment was nothing like I'd imagined. I had expected something sleek and modern, all glass and chrome. Instead, I stepped into a space that was warm and surprisingly homey. Hardwood floors, cream-colored walls, and large windows that filled the rooms with natural light. The furniture was elegant but comfortable, in shades of blue and soft gray. "This is mine?" I couldn't keep the wonder from my voice. The security man, Paolo, he'd introduced himself, smiled slightly. "Mr. Ricci had it prepared for you. The second bedroom is through there." He indicated a door off the main living area. "Already set up for the baby." My throat tightened as I pushed open the door. The room was a perfect nursery, painted in soft yellow with white trim. A beautiful wooden crib, not my second-hand one, but a new one crafted of rich cherry wood, stood in the center, complete with a mobile of delicate stars and moons. A rocking chair sat by the window, which overlooked a small private garden below. A dresser, changing table, and bookshelf completed the room, along with a plush rug that cushioned my steps as I wandered in disbelief. "When did he—" I couldn't finish the question. Paolo's expression revealed nothing. "Mr. Ricci is thorough. When he decides on a course of action, he ensures everything is prepared." The implication sent a shiver down my spine. How long had Antonio Ricci been watching me, planning to bring me into his world? The nursery hadn't been assembled overnight. This had been in preparation for days, perhaps weeks. "Your belongings will be brought up," Paolo continued, seemingly oblivious to my unease. "Mr. Ricci requests your presence for dinner at 8 p.m. He would like you to rest until then." With that, he left me alone in my new home, the door clicking shut behind him with a finality that made my heart race. I spent the afternoon exploring the apartment. The kitchen was a chef's dream, top-of-the-line appliances, marble countertops, and a pantry stocked with essentials. The master bedroom featured a king-sized bed with the softest sheets I'd ever touched, and a bathroom with a soaking tub big enough for my pregnant body to find true comfort. In the closet, I discovered a collection of maternity clothes in exactly my size, simple, elegant pieces that I could never have afforded on my own. The tags were still attached, the brands' names I recognized from magazines and shop windows I'd hurried past. By evening, my old possessions had been integrated into the new space, though they looked shabby and out of place amid such luxury. My second-hand crib had been placed beside the new one in the nursery, like a humble ancestor beside its royal descendant. At precisely 7:30 p.m., Paolo returned to escort me upstairs. Antonio's penthouse occupied the entire top floor of the building. The elevator opened directly into a foyer, where another security man stood silently. Beyond lay a space that took my breath away. Soaring ceilings, walls of glass revealing panoramic views of Milan's skyline, and furnishings that managed to be both luxurious and tasteful. "Sophia." Antonio's voice drew my attention to where he stood by a grand piano, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He'd changed from his morning suit into dark trousers and a crisp white shirt, open at the collar to reveal a glimpse of tanned skin. "Mr. Richi," I responded, suddenly conscious of my appearance. I'd chosen one of the new dresses, a simple black wrap style that accommodated my belly while still looking elegant. "Antonio?" he corrected, approaching with that predatory grace I was beginning to recognize. "If you're to cook for me, we should dispense with formalities." He didn't touch me, but his proximity sent my pulse racing nonetheless. This close, I could see the individual strands of silver at his temples, the fine lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more in private than he did in public. "Your apartment is satisfactory?" he asked, leading me toward the dining area where a table had been set for two. "It's beautiful," I admitted, "the nursery especially, though I have to wonder how long you've been planning this arrangement." A slight smile played at his lips as he held a chair for me. "Planning suggests premeditation. Let's call it anticipation of opportunity. And the Castellani women created that opportunity?" His expression darkened momentarily. "They accelerated a timeline, nothing more." A staff member appeared silently, serving a starter of delicate sea scallops with a champagne sauce. For me, a sparkling water with lemon. For Antonio, a glass of white wine. "Tomorrow," he said, changing the subject smoothly, "you'll begin your duties. My previous chef has been reassigned to my restaurant on Corso Buenos Aires. The kitchen is yours to organize as you see fit." I took a bite of the scallop, which was perfectly cooked. "These expectations, cooking for you and sometimes your associates, they seem minimal for the compensation you're offering." Antonio studied me over the rim of his wine glass. "Do you find generosity suspicious, Sophia?" "In my experience, nothing comes without a price." He nodded, as if my wariness pleased him. A practical perspective, but sometimes what appears to be generosity is simply good business. A chef of your talent, working exclusively for me, that has value. A talent you discerned from one risotto? "I recognize quality when I encounter it," he replied. "In all things." His gaze lingered on me and I felt heat rise to my cheeks. There was something in the way he looked at me. Not with the leering assessment I'd endured from other men since my pregnancy began to show, but with a focused intensity that seemed to see beyond my swollen body to something essential beneath. The main course arrived, a perfectly roasted duck with cherry reduction. As we ate, Antonio asked questions about my culinary training, my family background, my favorite dishes to prepare. I found myself relaxing despite my initial tension, drawn into conversation that felt almost normal. "And the father of your child?" he asked eventually, the question I'd been waiting for all evening. Marco mentioned he disappeared. I set down my fork, my appetite suddenly diminished. "Leo. We'd been together 3 years. When I told him about the baby, he seemed happy. Made plans. Then one day I came home, and he was gone, along with our savings." Antonio's expression hardened. "His full name? Why does it matter?" I asked, though I knew. I'd seen the flash of cold fury in his eyes. "Indulge me." I hesitated. Leo had betrayed me, abandoned me when I needed him most. But did I want Antonio Richi hunting him down? Did I want that responsibility? "Leonardo Ferretti," I said finally. "But whatever you're thinking, don't. He's not worth the trouble." Antonio smiled, a predator's smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "Everyone is worth exactly the trouble they've earned, Sophia. No more, no less. After dinner, he showed me his kitchen, a gleaming sanctuary of stainless steel and imported marble that made my heart race with professional excitement. Every tool, every appliance was top of the line. A walk-in refrigerator and freezer stood ready to be filled with ingredients of my choosing. "Your domain," he said, watching my reaction with evident satisfaction. "Whatever you need, you'll have. My staff has standing orders to accommodate your requests." I ran my fingers along the cool countertop, imagining the meals I could create in this space. After years of cramped restaurant kitchens and my tiny apartment stove, this felt like a dream. "Thank you," I said simply, unsure how else to express the complicated mix of gratitude and wariness I felt. Antonio moved closer, his presence filling the kitchen in a way that made it suddenly more intimate. "There is one more thing we should discuss." My pulse quickened. "Yes?" "Security," he said. "As a member of my household, you'll have certain protections and certain restrictions." "Restrictions?" He nodded, his dark eyes serious. "My driver will take you wherever you need to go. You don't leave the building without security. Your visitors must be approved in advance." I stiffened. "So I'm a prisoner?" "You're protected," he corrected firmly. "Milan can be dangerous, especially for someone connected to me." "Connected how?" I challenged. "I'm your chef, not your—" I broke off, unsure how to finish. A smile ghosted across his lips. "Not my what, Sophia?" Heat flooded my cheeks. "You know what I mean." "I do," he acknowledged. "But perception matters in my world. People will assume what they wish, regardless of reality, and those assumptions make you either a target or someone to be respected." "And which would you prefer?" I asked, suddenly bold. Antonio's gaze darkened, something primal flashing in their depths. "I would prefer you safe." The intensity in his voice made my breath catch. For a moment, we stood in charged silence, the air between us heavy with unspoken possibilities. Then my daughter kicked hard, a sharp movement visible even through my dress, breaking the moment. Antonio's eyes dropped to my belly, and something shifted in his expression, a softening I hadn't seen before. Without asking permission, he reached out, his large hand hovering just above the spot where my baby continued to kick. I should have stepped back, should have maintained the professional boundary I'd promised myself. Instead, I nodded, and his palm came to rest gently against me. My daughter kicked again, as if in greeting, and Antonio's face transformed with wonder. In that unguarded moment, I glimpsed something beyond the controlled exterior he presented to the world, something vulnerable and almost tender. "A fighter," he murmured. "Like her mother," I replied without thinking. His eyes met mine, alight with something that made my heart stutter. "Yes, exactly like her mother." He withdrew his hand slowly, the professional mask sliding back into place. "It's getting late. You should rest. Tomorrow will be a full day." Paolo appeared as if summoned by some silent signal, ready to escort me back to my apartment. At the elevator, I turned to find Antonio watching me with that same intense gaze that seemed to see too much. "Good night, Sophia," he said, the words holding a weight beyond their simple meaning. "Good night, Antonio," I replied, testing the familiarity of his name on my tongue. As the elevator doors closed between us, I placed my hand where his had been, my daughter now quiet within me. What had I gotten myself into? This man, this world of luxury and danger. It was everything I'd never imagined for myself. Yet as I returned to my beautiful apartment with its perfect nursery, I couldn't bring myself to regret my decision. For the first time since Leo's betrayal, since my mother's death, I felt something like security. Even if that security came with golden chains, I didn't yet fully understand. The following weeks established a rhythm to my new life that was both comforting and unsettling. Each morning, I woke in my luxurious apartment, planned menus for the day, and then made my way upstairs to Antonio's kitchen, my kitchen now, to prepare his breakfast. He preferred simple fare in the mornings, perfectly poached eggs, artisanal bread with local honey, seasonal fruit. Sometimes he joined me in the kitchen, perching on a stool at the counter while I worked, drinking his espresso in contemplative silence or asking questions about my process. Other mornings, He was already gone before dawn, his security detail murmuring about meetings in Turin or Rome. On those days, I prepared meals to be reheated by his staff and spent my time exploring the building's amenities. A rooftop garden where I grew herbs for my cooking, a small but well-appointed gym where a personal trainer helped me with pregnancy-safe exercises, a private courtyard where I could sit in the autumn sunshine, feeling my daughter grow stronger with each passing day. My 7th month of pregnancy brought increasing discomfort, but also a kind of serene preparation. The nursery was fully stocked now, a combination of the luxury items Antonio had provided, and personal touches I'd added myself, a quilt my mother had made years ago, a small stuffed rabbit I'd splurged on during one of my escorted shopping trips, a framed ultrasound picture showing my daughter's perfect profile. I hadn't heard from Marco since that morning in my old apartment, though I'd tried calling him once. The number was disconnected. When I asked Antonio about it, he merely said that Marco had decided to join his cousin in Turin after all. The explanation felt incomplete, but I didn't press. Some questions seemed safer left unasked in Antonio's world. It was during my 8th month that I finally encountered the hidden currents of that world directly. I was preparing dinner for Antonio and 3 associates. A rare request, as he usually dined with business contacts at restaurants rather than at home. The menu was ambitious: risotto with white truffles, rack of lamb with rosemary and garlic, a selection of seasonal vegetables, and for dessert, a delicate zabaglione with fresh berries. The kitchen was my sanctuary now. I moved through it with confidence, the high-end appliances and tools extensions of my own hands. Cooking for Antonio had awakened the passion for food that financial struggles had nearly smothered. He appreciated everything I prepared, offering thoughtful observations rather than empty praise. I was finishing the risotto when I heard raised voices from the dining room. Antonio rarely raised his voice. His power lay in quiet control rather than volume, so the sharp edge of his tone made me freeze, listening. "Unacceptable," he was saying, the word clipped and dangerous. I made myself perfectly clear about the terms. Another voice responded, too low for me to make out the words. "The Castellanis are testing me," Antonio continued, his voice now deadly calm. "They should know better." I should have returned to my cooking, pretended not to hear. But the mention of the Castellani family, the first I'd heard since that night at Bellissimo, rooted me to the spot. Their daughter and nieces learned their lesson. A different voice said, clearer now as if the speaker had moved closer to the kitchen. "But Giovanni is old school. He thinks your domestic situation has made you soft." Antonio's laugh held no humor. "Then he understands nothing. Arrange a meeting. Tonight, after dinner, and make sure our friends on the police force are properly compensated for their discretion regarding the Castellani shipment." I backed away from the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. The Castellani women had learned their lesson. Police were being paid for discretion. These were not the conversations of a legitimate businessman. The kitchen door swung open, and I turned quickly to the stove, stirring the risotto with more vigor than necessary. But it wasn't Antonio who entered. It was a man I'd never seen before, tall and lean with calculating eyes that assessed me in one swift glance. "So you're the chef," he said, his northern Italian accent crisp and precise. Antonio's new acquisition. Something in his tone made my skin crawl. I straightened, one hand automatically moving to my rounded belly. "I am Mr. Ricci's personal chef, yes." The man smiled, though the expression didn't reach his eyes. "Francesco Bianchi," he introduced himself, moving further into the kitchen, into my space. "I've known Antonio since we were boys in Sicily. We have no secrets." I kept my expression neutral. "The risotto needs my attention, Mr. Bianchi, if you'll excuse me." Instead of leaving, he leaned against the counter, watching me work. "He's quite taken with you, you know. I've never seen him so domesticated." "I'm just his chef," I repeated firmly. Francesco laughed softly. "Is that what you believe? A pregnant waitress who spills wine on the wrong people, and suddenly you're living in his building, cooking in his kitchen? Antonio doesn't make such arrangements out of charity." My cheeks burned with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. What arrangements Antonio makes are his business, and mine. "Of course," he agreed smoothly. I simply thought you should know what people are saying. That Antonio Richi has finally found his weakness, a beautiful young woman carrying another man's child. Before I could respond, the kitchen door opened again, and Antonio himself appeared. His expression was pleasant enough, but I'd learned to read the signs of his anger, the tightness around his eyes, the controlled precision of his movements. "Francesco," he said evenly, "I don't recall inviting you into my kitchen." Francesco straightened, something like wariness crossing his features. "Just making conversation with your lovely chef. The risotto smells divine." Antonio's gaze flicked to me, then back to Francesco. "The others are waiting." With a nod to me, Francesco left the kitchen. Antonio remained, watching me as I turned back to the risotto, adding the final touch of Parmigiano Reggiano. "What did he say to you?" Antonio asked, his voice deceptively casual. I considered lying, but instinct told me Francesco would tell him anyway, perhaps with embellishments. "He implied that I am more than your chef, that people are talking." Antonio moved closer, his presence filling the kitchen as it always did. "And does that bother you? What people think?" I met his eyes directly. "It bothers me to be seen as your acquisition, or your weakness." Something dangerous flashed in his expression. "Francesco said that? That you're my weakness?" I nodded, suddenly regretting my honesty. The atmosphere in the kitchen had shifted, the air charged with tension. Antonio was silent for a long moment, watching me with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. Then, to my surprise, he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers lingering against my cheek. "Finish dinner," he said softly. "We'll talk later." He left me standing in the kitchen, my heart racing and my cheek burning where his fingers had touched. Dinner service passed in a blur of careful plating and quiet instruction to Antonio's staff who served the courses. I remained in the kitchen, focusing on my work rather than the muted conversation from the dining room. Whatever business Antonio was conducting with his associates, I wanted no part of it. It was nearly midnight when the last guest departed. I was wiping down the counters, preparing to return to my apartment, when Antonio reappeared in the kitchen doorway, his tie loosened, and a glass of whiskey in his hand. "You should be resting," he said, his eyes taking in my evident fatigue. "The baby is fine," I assured him, "just restless tonight." He entered the kitchen fully, setting his glass on the counter. "You heard our conversation earlier about the Castellanis." It wasn't a question. I nodded, seeing no point in denial. "And now you're afraid," he continued, watching me closely. "Afraid of who I really am." "I've known who you are since that first night," I said quietly. "Or at least, I've suspected. And yet you came with me, accepted my offer. As I told you then, desperation, not bravery." He moved closer, close enough that I could smell the whiskey on his breath and the subtle scent of his cologne. "Are you still desperate, Sophia? Still with me only because you have no choice?" The question hung between us, weighted with implications I wasn't ready to face, because the truth was, somewhere in the past weeks, my feelings toward Antonio had shifted. Despite the dangerous world he inhabited, despite the secrets and shadows, I'd come to anticipate his presence, to value his quiet attention, to crave the rare moments when his careful control slipped to reveal the man beneath. "I don't know," I answered honestly. Antonio studied me for a long moment, then nodded as if coming to a decision. "The Castellani women. You want to know what happened to them?" My breath caught. "Yes. They're in Switzerland, at a spa resort owned by a cousin of mine. They are comfortable, unharmed, and reflecting on the consequences of their actions." His tone was matter-of-fact, as if discussing the weather rather than the abduction of 3 women. "For how long?" "Until Giovanni Castellani remembers the terms of our arrangement. Another week, perhaps 2. Relief washed through me, followed immediately by a wave of confusion at my own reaction. Why should I be relieved? The women had been cruel to me, yes, but they'd been taken against their will, held as leverage in some business dispute. Yet instead of horror, I felt acceptance. "And Marco?" I asked, the question that had been gnawing at me for weeks. "Did he really go to Turin?" Antonio's expression gave nothing away. "Does it matter? He was kind to me, and yet he abandoned you when you accepted my offer." Antonio took a step closer, his dark eyes intent on mine. Everyone in your life has abandoned you, Sophia. Your mother to death, Leonardo to his cowardice, Marco to his fear. Everyone except me. The words struck a chord so deep that tears sprang unbidden to my eyes. I turned away, unwilling to let him see how accurately he'd identified the wound at the core of my being. But Antonio caught my chin gently with his hand, turning my face back to his. I won't abandon you, Sophia. Or your daughter. Not now. Not ever. Whatever you may think of me, of what I do, know this. My protection is absolute. My loyalty, once given, is unbreakable. The intensity in his eyes, the certainty in his voice, made my heart stutter. I should have been afraid of this man who spoke of loyalty while holding women captive in Switzerland, who had probably done far worse things than I could imagine. Instead, I found myself leaning into his touch, craving the security he offered when the rest of the world had turned away. Why me? I whispered, the question that had haunted me since that first night. Of all the women in Milan, why choose a pregnant waitress with nothing to offer but risotto? Something shifted in Antonio's expression, a softening, a vulnerability I'd rarely glimpsed. His thumb traced the curve of my cheek with unexpected tenderness, because when I walked into that restaurant and saw you standing there, wine dripping from your clothes, chin raised despite your humiliation, I recognized something I thought no longer existed. His voice dropped to a near whisper. Purity. Not innocence. Life has taken that from you, but a fundamental purity of spirit that this world hasn't managed to corrupt. He leaned closer, his breath warm against my face. And for a man whose soul has known nothing but darkness, such light is irresistible. My heart pounded against my ribs as the space between us narrowed to nothing. Antonio's lips met mine in a kiss that was achingly gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. When I didn't pull away, his hand slid to the nape of my neck, drawing me closer as the kiss deepened. Heat bloomed in my chest, spreading outward until every nerve ending seemed alive with sensation. It had been so long since I'd been touched with desire rather than clinical concern, so long since I'd felt anything but the heavy weight of survival. Antonio pulled back first, his breathing uneven, his eyes dark with restrained passion. This wasn't part of our arrangement, he said, his voice rough. No, I agreed, my own voice barely recognizable. I won't press for more than you're willing to give. You're under my protection regardless, I believed him. Whatever else Antonio Richi might be, criminal, kidnapper, perhaps worse. He was a man of his word. He would protect me, provide for me, desire me, without demanding what I wasn't ready to give. But as I looked up at him, at the face that had become the center of my new world, I realized with startling clarity that I wanted to give more. Despite the dangers, despite the moral ambiguities, despite the voice of caution screaming in the back of my mind, I wanted this man with an intensity that frightened me. Antonio, I whispered, his name a question and an answer all at once. He understood. With careful hands, he drew me against him. One palm splayed protectively over my rounded belly where my daughter lay between us, a silent promise to us both. When he kissed me again, it was with controlled passion, a man accustomed to taking what he wanted, but choosing instead to savor what was freely offered. Later, as he led me not down to my apartment, but up to his own private rooms, I knew I was crossing a threshold from which there would be no return. By morning, Francesco's insinuations would be truth. I would no longer be just Antonio Ricci's chef. I would be his. And despite everything, the whispered rumors, the dangerous business conducted over dinner, the moral compromises, I couldn't bring myself to regret a single step of the path that had led me here. To this man, to this moment. For the first time since I'd learned I was carrying a child, I felt not just safe, but cherished. And in a world that had offered me nothing but hardship, that feeling was worth any price. 3 weeks after that night in Antonio's kitchen, I stood in the nursery of my apartment, folding tiny clothes with careful hands. My daughter was due any day now, my body heavy with anticipation and the physical strain of late pregnancy. The past weeks had transformed my life in ways I still struggled to comprehend. I had become Antonio Ricci's lover, though the word seemed inadequate to describe what existed between us. In public, his demeanor remained controlled and distant, the powerful mafia boss whose name was whispered with fear and respect throughout Milan. But in private, he revealed a tenderness that continually surprised me. Gentle hands mapping the contours of my changing body, quiet conversations in the darkness, a protectiveness that went beyond mere possession. Yet alongside this newfound intimacy, I had also gained a clearer understanding of Antonio's world. The business conducted in hushed tones when associates visited. The security measures that had tightened around me as my relationship with Antonio became known. The way people looked at me now, with calculation, assessment, sometimes envy, sometimes fear. The Castellani women had returned from Switzerland after 10 days, the business dispute apparently resolved. I'd seen Valentina Castellani once, at a distance, during a rare dinner out with Antonio. She'd gone pale at the sight of us, then quickly left the restaurant. Antonio had watched her retreat with cold satisfaction, his hand tightening possessively around mine. I was arranging baby blankets when I felt the first contraction, a tightening across my lower back that took my breath away. I braced myself against the crib, waiting for it to pass. Just Braxton Hicks, I told myself. False labor. I'd been experiencing them for days. But 20 minutes later, another pain gripped me, stronger this time. And then my water broke. A sudden warm gush that left no doubt. My daughter was coming. Antonio was in Naples on business. He'd left 2 days earlier, promising to return before the weekend, kissing me deeply before stepping into the elevator with his security detail. I had his private number, a privilege few possessed, but I hesitated to use it. This was his first trip since we'd become lovers, an important meeting he'd already postponed twice because of his reluctance to leave me so close to my due date. Instead, I called Paolo, who answered on the first ring. The baby was all I managed to say before another contraction seized me. He didn't need more explanation. Stay where you are. We'll be right up. Within minutes, Paolo and a female security officer I knew only as Elena were at my door. Elena helped me change clothes and gather the hospital bag I'd prepared weeks ago, while Paolo made phone calls in rapid Italian too low for me to catch. Antonio, I asked as they escorted me to the elevator. He's been informed, Paolo replied. His usual stoicism softened with something like concern. He's arranging to return immediately. The private hospital where Antonio had arranged for me to deliver was only 15 minutes from the apartment. By the time we arrived, my contractions were coming faster, the pain intensifying with each wave. A team of medical staff was waiting, escorting me directly to a luxurious private suite that looked more like a hotel room than a hospital. My labor progressed rapidly. The doctor, a woman with kind eyes and competent hands, assured me everything was proceeding normally, that first babies often came quickly when they decided it was time. Elena stayed with me. Her usually stern expression softened as she held my hand through contractions, while Paolo maintained his post outside the door. I was fully dilated, the urge to push overwhelming, when the door burst open and Antonio appeared, still in his travel clothes, his hair disheveled as if he'd run his hands through it repeatedly. His eyes found mine immediately, dark with concern and something deeper that made my heart clench. "Sophia," he breathed, crossing to my side in 2 long strides. "You made it," I gasped, relief washing through me as his large hand enveloped mine. "I would have moved heaven and earth," he said simply, and I believed him. The next hours blurred into a haze of pain and effort. Antonio never left my side, his voice a steady anchor urging me forward, his strength sustaining me when I thought I couldn't continue. And when my daughter finally entered the world with a lusty cry, his face transformed with wonder as the doctor placed her tiny form on my chest. "She's perfect," he whispered, one finger gently stroking her dark, downy hair. I looked down at her, this miracle who had survived her father's abandonment, who had been the catalyst for my unlikely salvation, and felt love unlike anything I'd known possible. "Aria," I said, the name I'd chosen weeks ago. Aria Sofia Russo. Antonio's eyes met mine, something unspoken passing between us. Then he leaned down, pressing his lips to my forehead with unexpected tenderness. "Aria," he repeated, testing the name on his tongue. "It suits her." The hospital suite had a second room with a comfortable bed where Antonio could stay. But that first night, he refused to leave my side, keeping vigil in a chair beside my bed, one hand resting protectively near Aria's bassinet. I drifted in and out of exhausted sleep, each time opening my eyes to find him still there, sometimes watching Aria, sometimes watching me with an expression that made my chest ache. We returned to the apartment building 3 days later. To my surprise, Antonio led us not to my 6th-floor apartment, but to the penthouse. The elevator opened directly into his foyer, where I stopped short at the sight before me. The sleek, masculine space had been transformed. A beautiful bassinet stood near the sofa in the main living area. A changing table had been installed in a corner that previously held an abstract sculpture. Soft blankets and tiny clothes were arranged neatly on shelves that had once displayed first edition books. "Antonio," I said, looking around in confusion. "What is this?" He took Aria from my arms, cradling her with a gentleness that still amazed me. For a man whose hands had likely ordered death and violence, he held my daughter as if she were spun glass. "You didn't think I would have you and Aria living separately from me?" he asked, his voice soft but firm. "Unless you prefer your own space." I heard the uncertainty beneath the question, a vulnerability few would ever witness from Antonio Richi. "No," I said quickly. "But I didn't assume this wasn't part of our arrangement." A smile touched his lips. "Our arrangement has evolved, wouldn't you say?" Aria squirmed in his arms, her tiny face scrunching in what I already recognized as the prelude to a cry for feeding. As I settled on the sofa to nurse her, Antonio sat beside me, his arm a warm weight around my shoulders. "There's something else we should discuss," he said, his tone turning serious. I looked up from Aria's face, suddenly anxious. "What is it?" "Leonardo Ferretti." My breath caught. In the whirlwind of the past months, falling in love with Antonio, preparing for Aria's birth, I'd thought less and less about the man who'd abandoned us. What about him? Antonio's expression hardened slightly. "He's been found." A cold weight settled in my stomach. I'd suspected Antonio might look for Leo, but hearing confirmation was different. "Where?" "Lisbon. Living under a slightly altered name, working at a tourist restaurant." His voice was carefully neutral. "He has a new girlfriend. They appear to be expecting a child." The news should have hurt. 6 months ago it would have devastated me. But as I looked down at Aria, then up at the man beside me, I felt only a distant sadness for the life I'd once imagined with Leo. "What happens now?" I asked quietly. Antonio studied my face. "That depends on you." I understood then. He was offering Leo's fate to me. Retribution, if I desired it. A reckoning for the man who'd stolen our savings and left me pregnant and alone. "Nothing," I said firmly. "Let him live his life. Let his new child grow up with a father." I held Antonio's gaze. "We don't need him. We never did." Something like pride flickered in Antonio's eyes. He nodded once, a decisive gesture. "As you wish." Later that night, with Aria sleeping peacefully in her bassinet, Antonio led me to the balcony overlooking the lights of Milan. The October air held a crisp chill, but I was warm in the circle of his arms, my back against his chest, as we stood in comfortable silence. "I never expected this," he said finally, his breath warm against my hair. "You, Aria, this feeling." I turned in his embrace to look up at him. "What feeling?" His hands framed my face, thumbs tracing the curve of my cheekbones. "Completion. As if a piece of myself I never knew was missing has finally been found." The words sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with the autumn breeze. For a man who spoke rarely of emotions, this was a profound confession. "Antonio," I began, but he pressed a finger gently to my lips. "Let me finish." He took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving mine. "I know what I am, Sophia. I know the world I inhabit, the things I've done, the enemies I've made. I know I can never be the kind of man who lives a normal life, who walks his daughter to school without security, who takes his woman to dinner without watching every door and window." Sorrow tinged his voice, a rare glimpse of regret from a man who seemed to move through life with unwavering certainty. "But I can promise you this," he continued, his voice gaining strength. "Every day of my life will be dedicated to your protection, to Arya's future. No harm will ever come to either of you while I draw breath. No comfort, no luxury, no happiness will be beyond your reach." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. My heart stuttered as he opened it, revealing a ring, a stunning emerald surrounded by diamonds, set in platinum. "This isn't a normal proposal," he said, his eyes holding mine with fierce intensity. "I'm not offering you a normal life. I'm offering you everything I am, everything I have, for as long as I live. Marry me, Sophia. Be my wife in every way. Let me be Arya's father in more than just name." Tears blurred my vision as I looked at the ring, at this man who had entered my life on the worst night and transformed it into something I'd never dared dream. Antonio was right. Life with him would never be normal. There would always be dangers, shadows, moral compromises. The man I loved lived by a code most would find incomprehensible. His hands had ordered punishments I could never fully condone, and yet he had shown me a tenderness few would believe him capable of. He had created a sanctuary where Arya and I would never want for anything. He had proven, time and again, that his protection was absolute, his loyalty unbreakable. "Yes," I said, the word emerging as a whisper. "Yes, I'll marry you." The ring slid onto my finger, heavy and cool. Antonio's lips claimed mine in a kiss that spoke of possession, protection, and a passion that still took my breath away. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were dark with promise. "There's one more thing," he said, leading me back inside, toward the desk in his study. He unlocked a drawer, retrieving a thick folder of legal documents. I had these prepared after Arya's birth. Adoption papers. If you consent, she will legally be my daughter, with all the rights and protections that entails. I opened the folder with trembling hands, scanning the formal legal language. Antonio Richi was proposing to give Arya his name, his heritage, his fortune. The daughter Leo had abandoned would have a father who chose her, who wanted her. "You would do this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Antonio did nothing by half measures. "I already consider her mine," he said simply. "This only makes it official." From the bedroom came a tiny cry, Arya awakening for her midnight feeding. Without hesitation, Antonio moved toward the sound, returning moments later with my daughter cradled expertly against his chest, her cries already quieting at his gentle murmuring. The sight of them together, this powerful, dangerous man and my tiny, innocent daughter, crystallized everything I felt. Whatever paths had led us here, whatever future awaited us with its complications and contradictions, this was my family now. 6 months ago, 3 cruel women had spilled wine on a desperate waitress, unaware that their petty cruelty would set in motion a chain of events none could have predicted. They couldn't have known that the humiliated server would catch the eye of the most feared man in Milan. They couldn't have imagined that their momentary amusement would lead to their own temporary captivity, and to my unexpected salvation. As I took Arya from Antonio's arms, settling into the chair he'd had placed in the bedroom specifically for night feedings, I looked up at the man who would soon be my husband. His expression as he watched us, fierce protectiveness mingled with wonder, told me everything I needed to know. I had entered Antonio Ricci's world through a door opened by chance and desperation. I would remain by choice, by love, by the unbreakable bonds we had forged. And in this world of shadows and power, my daughter would grow up cherished and protected, never knowing the abandonment I had suffered, never facing the struggles that had shaped my life before that fateful night at Bellissimo. Antonio leaned down to press a kiss to Arya's dark head, then to my lips. "My family," he said, the words holding the weight of an oath, "forever." I believed him. Whatever else Antonio Ricci might be, he was a man who kept his promises. And as Milan's lights twinkled beyond the windows and my daughter nursed contentedly in my arms, I found peace in the certainty that I had finally found my home. Not in a place, but in the love of a man who had claimed us as his own.